Bishop Robert Barron is one of the foremost Catholic thinkers on the scene today, and a cornerstone in his ministry has been an emphasis on the use of beauty in evangelization. Now, most of the time, when Bishop Barron talks about beauty and evangelization, he's encouraging the use of a practical method that he thinks will help people come to know God. Here's Bishop Barron talking about his methodology.
I think that's a good way to evangelize today. Begin with the beautiful. So, begin with Chartres. Begin with Sainte-Chapelle. Begin with the life of St. Francis of Assisi. Begin with the Mother Teresa sisters in Calcutta. Begin with Merton's Seven-Story Mountain. Don't moralize. Don't intellectualize. Let people see. Show them. Look at this. And the beautiful, I think, will work a kind of alchemy.
So for Bishop Barron, beauty is a way to encourage people to emotionally come to know the Catholic faith. The idea is that people will see the beautiful art and architecture and tradition and practice of Catholicism and Christianity more broadly, and then be drawn to it, and then that will encourage them to start looking into the intellectual arguments for Catholicism. Now, I think that's all well and good, but I also have to wonder if maybe beauty can be used for more than that. I have to wonder if maybe it's possible to formulate an intellectual argument, which starts with the observation that there's beauty in the world, and ends in the conclusion that God exists. I have to wonder, in other words, if it's possible to formulate a philosophical argument from beauty for the existence of God. And I think Bishop Barron actually gives us a really good starting point for trying to make something like that argument. Here's a clip to show what I'm talking about.
If you want to talk about an argument for beauty, the closest would be Aquinas' Fourth Way in the Summa. One that people hardly ever talk about. They talk about the argument from motion, from causality, the one for necessary being, and even the fifth argument from finality. But number 4 comes up out of the Platonic tradition. Remember when he says, we notice in the world things to varying degrees of nobility, truth, and goodness. And so when we make those judgments, we're doing it in light of something we intuit to be supremely good, true, and noble. He's noticing, what they call in the Middle Ages the transcendental properties of being. So not just any old comparison, like, oh, that light's brighter than that one, or boy, that's a redder thing than that. But these judgments within the unconditioned quality of being itself. So Thomas says that when I'm making those judgments, I am at least intuitively aware of an unconditioned form of the good and the noble and the true. And then he says that highest norm is also the cause of all the things within that genus. Hence, the supremely true, the supremely good, the supremely noble is the cause of truth and nobility and goodness in all the things that we see.
The most important part of that clip is where Bishop Barron connects the argument from beauty to Aquinas' Fourth Way. Now, I recently did a video a couple weeks back on Aquinas' Fourth Way, and I'll link it in the description below if you want to click on that and go in deeper with this argument. Here's a brief summary to give us an idea of what the argument's about going forward. Aquinas notes that there's certain properties which are common to everything that exists, and these he calls transcendentals because they transcend our typical categories for things, and they're common to all categories, no matter what kind of things we're talking about. For Aquinas, the most important of the transcendentals is being, and it's also the easiest one to see, because everything that exists, says Aquinas, can be said to have this property of being or existence. Everything that exists has the property existence. That seems pretty straightforward, right? But there's also other transcendentals, and for Aquinas, these transcendentals are really just different qualifications of being, or different ways of looking at being. Truth, for example, is just being considered as intelligible, or being as known. Goodness is just being considered as appetible, or being as looking for more being. So truth and goodness, these other transcendentals, are different subsets of being. So they also, like the other transcendentals, can be said to be true of everything that is. Everything that exists, everything that has being, is to some extent good. Everything that exists is to some extent true. So goodness and truth are common to everything that is. And this leads into Aquinas' second point in the argument, that for Aquinas, these transcendentals come in different degrees. Everything that exists has them, but everything that exists has them to greater or lesser extents. Some things have more being than others. Some things have more goodness than others. Some things have more truth than others. And because they exist to greater or lesser degrees, nothing in the world, nothing of our experience has these transcendentals to the fullest possible extent. Nothing that we experience has these transcendentals completely. So that means that none of these things of our experience can have truth or goodness or being, these transcendentals, as part of its essence. It must have it given to it by something which has being or truth or goodness as part of its essence, whose essence just is being, or whose essence just is goodness, or whose essence just is truth. And for Aquinas, those things must ultimately be one thing, because these three transcendentals, like we said, truth, being, goodness, are interchangeable. They're really just different ways of looking at being. So truth itself and goodness itself must ultimately be being itself. And for Aquinas, being itself is just what it means to be God. So these transcendentals ultimately lead us to the conclusion that God exists. Now, what does all this have to do with beauty? Well, it seems to me that what Bishop Barron is arguing is that beauty, like truth and goodness and being, is a transcendental. It's common to everything that is. So it seems that because beauty, according to Bishop Barron, is a transcendental, we can apply the same logic we used in the Fourth Way to beauty to arrive at the conclusion of something which is all beautiful, which he seems to say must be God. So, what is beauty? It's common today to say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That beauty is just a way of talking about our subjective preferences for the appearance of one thing over another thing. If I say, that's a beautiful painting, all I'm saying is I have a subjective, emotional liking for that painting. And I think there's something to that. After all, there's certainly a matter for tastes in beauty. Just because I like one song, for example, doesn't mean you have to like that song. You know, I can like one song more than another song. There's definitely an element of subjectivity in beauty, but that can't be all of it. I think there also has to be an objective element. Why? Well, because it seems that intuitively, most of us would say that there's certain positions about aesthetics that are just wrong. As wrong as saying that 2 + 2 = 5. If someone came up to you and said, you know, I've seen the Sistine Chapel, it's okay, but you know, I think a dirty pile of laundry is so much more beautiful than the Sistine Chapel. I think you would be right in saying, no, buddy, you're just dead wrong. It's just not the case that a dirty pile of laundry can be more beautiful than the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel is objectively more beautiful than a dirty pile of laundry. So there has to be this objective element in addition to a subjective element to beauty. And I think I have an idea of how to ground this objective element of beauty. I think beauty can best be conceived as goodness expressing itself. A thing is beautiful if the goodness inherent in it expresses itself physically or in some other way. And I think this gives us a way to ground beauty objectively. Because if goodness is objective, and I think most of us intuitively, when we really get down to it, would say that it is, then beauty as an expression of goodness is also objective. That's where the objective element comes in. And I think it also, this conception of beauty as goodness expressing itself, also gives us a really good way to think about how beauty could come in degrees. Because if things are able to express their goodness to greater or lesser degrees, to greater or lesser extents, then they're able to have beauty to greater or lesser extent, if beauty is just the expression of goodness. So take an example. I'm from the Boston area. In the city of Boston, there are two main political centers. There's the Massachusetts State House, and there's the Boston City Hall. Now, both of these buildings have really important functions, so they have a lot of goodness and dignity about them because of their important political functions. But I would say the Massachusetts State House does a much, much better job depicting and presenting that inherent goodness about its function in itself physically than the Boston City Hall does. I mean, the Massachusetts State House has this nice golden dome. It's got this nice brickwork. It looks really grand. It's the kind of building that you walk by and you say, wow, whatever happens in that building must be really important. Now, the Boston City Hall has some of that. Like, you walk by it and you definitely get a sense that there's something happening there. But it doesn't have the same kind of grandeur about it as the Massachusetts State House. So these two buildings are both beautiful, But one of them is way more beautiful than the other one because it expresses its function physically much better than the other building. It's more beautiful. So beauty, like goodness and truth and being, is a transcendental, and it comes in degrees. If beauty comes in degrees, then nothing has it fully. And if nothing has beauty fully, then nothing has it as part of its essence. Or at least nothing we see around us. Because if there's going to be a thing called beauty in all these things we see, then according to the logic of the fourth way, that beauty has to be in them by participation in some ultimate standard of beauty. And this ultimate standard must be beauty itself. And because, like we said, beauty is just goodness expressing itself, then beauty itself would also have to be goodness itself. And like we said earlier, goodness is just a different way of talking about being. So beauty itself would have to be goodness itself, which would have to be being itself. And being itself is exactly what Aquinas means by God. So from the existence of beauty, we have now arrived at the existence of a thing which is being itself. In other words, we've arrived from the existence of beauty at the existence of God. Not bad.